Hey, it's Sam, talking about Purva Ashada Nakshatra, the very devotional section of Sagittarius, ruled by the god Apis, the god of the ocean. It's how we nurture those seeds of truth, so check it out. So Purva Ashada Nakshatra is the section of Sagittarius where we nurture those seeds of devotion that we planted in Mula. At least hopefully they were seeds of devotion or things that we can be devoted to. Want to understand that this is always the process. We plant some seed, we derive some wisdom from the pain of life. The pain and vulnerability of Scorpio creates some kind of answer. We look for an answer in Sagittarius, and that's why that first nakshatra of Sagittarius is Mula, where our quest for an answer leads us to some depth where we uproot an old teaching and plant some new seeds there. This is how Mula is connected to Sagittarius. But then the next nakshatra is Purva Ashada, where we nurture those seeds and nurture those teachings. Think of how many times in your life, based on some crisis or something that has happened, you say, oh, okay, this is my philosophy. This is how I see it now. That's where you plant the seeds of Mula. Then you become somewhat devoted to those teachings, somewhat devoted to what you planted. Now, it might not be a good teaching. It might be something like, okay, well, I'm going to follow fish, or I'm going to follow this thing, or I'm going to believe in this. This is the answer. You know, making a lot of money is the answer. Or this relationship, this will save me, this will save me. And then you start to nurture and give love to that for a while, and then you ultimately see its truth and how resonant that truth is with who you really are. So this devotion to the seeds we've planted is Purva Ashada. It means early victory. And our early victories in life, and also the early victories, or the early victory of those seeds we've planted, those things that we believe in, are shown by our willingness to follow, innocently devoted to that thing. And you're innocently devoted to some extent to all the things that you believe, and then after a while, that innocent devotion starts to turn to something more rational, and then you start to scrutinize what you're believing in and see if it makes sense. This is the process. But Purva Ashada is that early victory, and the early victories are driven by devotion, love, and how devoted you are to those teachings. You might even have a good teaching, but not be very devoted to it because you're still confused. I'm actually seeing quite a bit of this these days with debates about astrology. People can ask me stuff, I give them the answer, but if they're not devoted, if they're still just confused, then they're not going to actually get any victory. Because the early victories in life come from how much trust, love, and devotion we have in the thing the seeds that are actually planted. And again, this is why it's important to uproot in Mula and plant seeds deeply, rather than kind of scratch the surface and kind of plant a bunch of seeds. Then we're not going to be very devoted. If we're planting seeds of this and planting seeds of that, and we're just kind of scattering seeds all over the place, nothing is going to grow because it has to go deep. The seeds have to go underground, and then we have to nurture them with love, care, patience. This is why we see a lot of really bad teachings in this world now, because things don't go deep. People stay on the surface, and they become seduced by novelty and trivia, personality, and all kinds of things that actually have nothing to do with authentic wisdom and authentic truth. Again, we see this a lot, especially in what you would call, spiritual sciences. There's quite a bit of it in astrology these days, particularly in Vedic astrology with the whole zodiac thing going on. Instead of looking at this comprehensively, it's very surface. At least most students come to it a very surface way and expect some kind of depth. And there is none. You have to go deeply into something and then be very devoted to that and really try it first. And so these things are all sort of congruent. The more shallow the seeds are planted, the more shallow your devotion is going to be. So this is why often the most dramatic upheaval creates the space for the most depth. After a dramatic upheaval like a death or something, we believe in something and we believe in it very deeply because we need that anchor, and then we become very devoted to it. It's also why there's a lot of fanaticism, big word, in Purva Ashada. It can be a lot of fanaticism. We can be just fanatically devoted to something and not using our discrimination or using our brain very well. So we have to be careful of a kind of fanatical devotion to something in Purva Ashada Nakshatra. But however, even if we're fanatically devoted to something, we're going to grow it. It will grow in us with a lot of depth. Because if we're fanatically devoted, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. If we're fanatically devoted to the truth, we're drunk with the ecstasy of bliss and bhakti. That's what's supposed to happen, actually. Anyone who has a Sadguru, you realize the Sadguru is the one that you should be fanatically devoted. Of course, after they sort of pass your tests. But if they pass your tests and prove to you their worth, then however devoted we are to those truths, the Sadguru shows up and delivers the answer, because the answer is always there. It's our surface mind and our ego that keeps us distracted from the authentic wisdom. And that authentic wisdom is in our heart, in the depth and the ocean of love, as shown by the God Appas, the God of the divine water. And it's very simple, because devotion is very simple. We're devoted to those things we believe in. Again, this is the connection to Sagittarius. And make no mistake, there's nakshatras and rashis are aligned. That devotion to our teachings and to our teachers and to the things that inspire us, even if they're wrong, is shown by this nakshatra. And I say even if they're wrong because have you ever been devoted to the wrong teaching? But your devotion was just as strong, right? Because your tendency for devotion, I'm just saying in general, this has nothing to do with whether you have planets in Appas or not. But your tendency for devotion is your tendency, regardless of whether it's a good teaching or not. We could be just as devoted to the wrong teaching. And so our capacity to recognize the right teaching is a completely different thing. There are people who are extremely devoted, fanatical, passionate, but to the wrong teaching. Again, look at people like, I use the example of like white supremacists or others who are fanatically devoted to that teaching. But you see their tendency to have a bad teaching based on other factors. So again, Purva Ashada is that section of Sagittarius that winds up being devoted to what we believe. And it's that devotion which shows our early victories in life as well. And that includes for us as a person, because literally even the foundation of your mind and your tendency and your capacity is how devoted your parents were to you. The early victories in life come from the love we were given. It forms the foundational structure of your capacity to trust and to love and to be devoted. And so therefore, again, to close the circle, the capacity of anything you're trying to grow in your life is also based on how much devotion you give it. That's why it's the early victory. That's why Purva Ashada is the early victory. Because the first victory and the earliest victory is the care, love, and devotion that we give to something when it's at that fragile state. It's like a sapling that starts to grow. At first, we need to protect it. We need to put a fence around it. We need to protect it from animals that will come and eat it. Literally, like let's say a tree like we plant an apple tree. As you know, it needs a lot of nurturing and love and care. That's this nakshatra. Caring for it even as it starts to grow. We need to put a little fence around it, make sure that animals don't come and eat it, or, you know, like a deer doesn't come and actually eat the whole tree. But then after a certain point, after we do this enough, that nurturing, which is Purva Ashada, then it gets stronger on its own, and then we don't need to protect it as much. Then we just need to keep, then it sort of gets into the realm of Uttara Ashada, the later victory. And the later victories come when we honor what are called the Vishwa Devas. That's in the next video. But Purva Ashada comes after we plant the seeds in Mula. Then we need to nurture and water those seeds. Just like our life was planted and started at some point, however much nurturing and love and care we were given and protection, that's our capacity and tendency to feel devoted to existence itself and to truth. Purva Ashada is the early victory related to the god Apis, the sign of Sagittarius, which is our inspirations, and how that inspiration and devotion to our teachings leads to higher wisdom.